June 15, 1987, Medellin, Colombia. 22-year-old Marcus Rivera had $37 in his pocket and 6 months of backpacking ahead of him. Bar La Rosa was supposed to be his last stop before heading home. The gunman came through the door at 11:43 p.m. Automatic weapons, black masks, death walking on 2 legs. Marcus didn't think. He dove, covered the quiet man in the corner booth who'd been buying him beers all night, took 3 bullets meant for someone else. The stranger whispered "Gracias, Nino," before disappearing into the smoke and screaming. What Marcus didn't know was that he'd just saved the life of the most wanted man in Colombia. Pablo Escobar never forgot a debt, never forgot a face, and for 36 years he'd been watching, waiting, protecting the boy who protected him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He tried to push himself up, wincing as pain shot through his left arm and ribs. The corner booth where the quiet man had been sitting was empty now, just overturned chairs and bullet holes in the wooden wall. Through the haze of gun smoke, Marcus caught glimpses of bodies scattered across the floor. Some moved, others didn't. ¿Dónde está? ¿Dónde está Escobar? The gunmen's voices cut through the chaos as they kicked over tables, searching. Marcus pressed himself lower, his backpack still somehow strapped to his shoulders, the weight of it now feeling like an anchor. One of the masked men stepped over a crying woman, his boots crunching on glass. "He was here. I saw him come in. Check the back," another voice barked. "Check everyone breathing." Marcus held his breath, watching blood drip from his fingertips onto the floor. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, he thought. The other 2 had caught his ribs, but the backpack had absorbed most of the impact. Lucky, or maybe not lucky at all. A boot appeared inches from his face, black leather, expensive. Marcus closed his eyes and played dead. "This one's American," the man said, nudging Marcus with his toe. "Just a kid. Leave him. We're looking for Escobar, not tourists." The boots moved away. Marcus counted heartbeats 53 before he dared to open his eyes again. The gunmen were gone, leaving behind the smell of cordite and death. Sirens wailed in the distance, but in Medellin in 1987 that could mean anything, or nothing. He crawled toward the back exit, leaving a trail of blood. His whole body shook, adrenaline and shock fighting for control. Outside, the alley was dark and empty except for a few overflowing dumpsters and the sound of his own ragged breathing. Marcus slumped against the brick wall, finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. He'd thrown himself over a stranger. A quiet man who'd seemed harmless enough, buying drinks for a broke American college kid, asking gentle questions about home and family in accented English. The man's eyes had been dark, almost black in the bar's dim lighting, intelligent, sad maybe. He'd talked about his own children, how he worried about their future in a violent world. Marcus had liked him instinctively, the way you sometimes connect with people when you're far from home and lonelier than you want to admit. Now that same man had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only 2 whispered words that Marcus would carry with him forever. "Gracias, Nino." Blood loss was making him dizzy. Marcus fumbled in his backpack for his first aid kit. His mother had insisted he pack one and managed to wrap his shoulder with gauze and medical tape. The ribs would have to wait. He needed to get back to his hostel, pack his things, and get out of Colombia before someone started asking questions he couldn't answer. The walk back took 40 minutes. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every car that passed made him flinch. By the time he reached the grimy building where he'd been staying, Marcus had decided he was done backpacking, done with adventure, done pretending he was brave enough for this kind of world. His roommate, a German kid named Klaus, was passed out drunk on his bunk. Marcus gathered his few belongings as quietly as he could, stuffing everything into his blood-stained pack. He left money on the nightstand for his share of the room and walked back out into the pre-dawn darkness. The bus station was already crowded with early commuters and vendors selling coffee and empanadas. Marcus bought a ticket on the first bus heading north, toward Bogota and the airport beyond. He slumped into a window seat, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. As the bus pulled away from Medellin, Marcus pressed his face against the glass and watched the city fade into gray morning haze. He told himself he'd forget this place, forget the gunfire and the blood and the stranger who'd called him Nino like a father might. He told himself the nightmares would stop eventually. He was wrong about everything. What Marcus Rivera didn't know, as he fled Colombia with 3 bullet wounds and $37 in his pocket, was that the man he'd saved would become the most powerful drug lord in history. He didn't know that Pablo Escobar would spend the next 6 years building an empire worth $30 billion, while never forgetting the face of the American boy who'd taken bullets meant for him. And he certainly didn't know that someday, 36 years later, that debt would come due in ways that would shatter everything he'd built since that terrible night in Bar La Rosa. The morning sun caught the chrome bumper of the 1987 Chevy Camaro just right, throwing golden light across the concrete floor of Rivera Auto Repair. Marcus stepped back from the engine bay, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades, and allowed himself a small smile. 36 years later, and he still couldn't work on an 87 anything without thinking about that year, about Colombia, about the night that changed everything. But here, in his shop on the outskirts of Phoenix, surrounded by the familiar smell of motor oil and the distant hum of traffic on Interstate 10, those memories felt manageable, contained, like old photographs tucked away in a drawer you rarely opened. The bell above the front door chimed, and Marcus looked up to see Sophia walking in with 2 cups of coffee from the diner across the street. His daughter moved carefully, favoring her left side where the port for her chemotherapy treatments created a tender spot beneath her collarbone. She'd turned 34 last month, but the cancer treatments had aged her, stealing the color from her cheeks and thinning her dark hair until she'd finally shaved it all off and embraced the scarves his late wife Elena had taught her to tie. "Thought you might need this," Sophia said, setting 1 cup on his workbench. Steam rose from the black coffee, carrying with it the bitter comfort of routine. "You should be resting," Marcus said, the same words he'd spoken every day for the past 8 months. "Dr. Chen said..." "Dr. Chen says a lot of things." Sophia settled onto the old couch he kept in the corner of the shop, the one where she used to do homework while he worked late into the evening after Elena died. "Besides, someone has to make sure you actually eat lunch today." Marcus felt the familiar twist in his chest, the one that came every time he looked at his daughter and saw Elena's stubborn streak, Elena's way of caring for everyone else first. Sophia was supposed to be starting her own family by now, maybe giving him grandchildren to spoil. Instead, she was fighting for her life with a grace that reminded him daily of everything he had to lose. "The insurance adjuster called about the Henderson claim," Sophia said, pulling out her phone to check messages, "and Mrs. Kowalski wants to know if you can look at her Buick next week." Normal things, everyday business, the kind of quiet life Marcus had built deliberately, carefully, after he'd returned from Colombia and spent 6 months waking up screaming. After he joined the DEA thinking he could somehow make sense of the violence he'd witnessed, only to burn out completely when the work dragged him back into the same darkness he was trying to escape. The shop had been Elena's idea. "You're good with your hands," she'd said, "and cars don't shoot at you." Simple wisdom from a woman who'd loved him despite the nightmares, despite the way he sometimes went quiet for hours when certain songs played on the radio or when the news showed footage of violence in Colombia. Through the window, Marcus could see the afternoon heat shimmering off the asphalt. Phoenix in July was brutal, but he'd grown to love the harsh clarity of it. Desert honesty, no hidden corners where memories could lurk. "Dad?" Sophia's voice cut through his thoughts. "You okay?" "Fine, mija, just thinking." She studied his face with the same intensity she'd inherited from Elena. "About Mom?" "Always about Mom," he said, which was mostly true. Elena had been gone 4 years now, heart attack while she slept, and he still reached for her side of the bed every morning, still made too much coffee out of habit. Sophia nodded, understanding. They'd learned to navigate grief together, he and his daughter. 2 people clinging to the same small life raft of routine and stubbornness and love that refused to break even when everything else did. "The treatment center called," she said quietly, "about next month's schedule." Marcus's hands stilled on the wrench he'd been cleaning. The treatments were experimental, expensive in ways that made his stomach clench when he thought about them too long. His insurance covered some, but not nearly enough. He'd been selling off Elena's jewelry piece by piece, quietly liquidating everything he could without Sophia knowing. It still wouldn't be enough. "We'll figure it out," he said, the same lie he'd been telling himself for months. "Dad, we'll figure it out, Sophia." She fell silent, but he could feel her watching him, worrying about him the same way he worried about her, both of them trying to protect the other from truths too heavy to carry alone. Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance, and for just a moment Marcus was 22 again, crouched in an alley in Medellin with blood on his hands and fear like ice in his veins. The sound faded, taking the memory with it, but leaving behind that familiar unease, the sense that somewhere, somehow, the past was still watching, waiting. "Unknown number," she said, then answered anyway. "Hello?" Marcus watched his daughter's expression change, confusion giving way to something that looked almost like relief. She covered the phone's mouthpiece with her hand. "Dad, it's someone from the treatment center about the payment for next month." The wrench slipped from Marcus's fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. He'd been dreading this call for weeks, the one where they'd tell him Sophia's treatments would have to stop until he could come up with another $40,000. Money he didn't have, money that didn't exist. Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper now. "What do you mean it's been taken care of?" A pause. "No, there must be some mistake. We haven't—" Her eyes found Marcus across the shop, wide and questioning. "Could you repeat that, please?" Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach despite the Phoenix heat. He moved closer, trying to catch fragments of the conversation, but Sophia had gone completely still, listening with an intensity that reminded him of Elena when she was trying to solve a problem that didn't make sense. "Yes, I understand. Anonymous benefactor. But the full amount?" Another long pause. "Through December. Are you absolutely certain?" The phone slipped slightly in Sophia's trembling fingers. Marcus reached for it, but she held up a hand, still listening. "No, no message, just paid in full. Cash transfer." Sophia's voice cracked. "Thank you. Yes, we'll be there Monday as scheduled." She ended the call and stared at the phone like it might explode. "Sophia, what did they say?" "Someone paid for my treatments. All of them. Through the end of the year." She looked up at him, tears beginning to form. "Dad, that's over $200,000. How could—" Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. The familiar shop suddenly felt foreign, threatening. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more alive. "That's not possible. The money's already in their account. Cash wire transfer from some kind of trust fund. No name attached, just a reference number." Sophia stood up shakily. "Dad, who do we know who has that kind of money?" Nobody. The answer was nobody. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities: distant relatives, Elena's family, maybe some kind of charity organization, but none of it made sense. People didn't just appear out of nowhere with hundreds of thousands of dollars to save strangers. "There has to be an explanation," Marcus said. But even as the words left his mouth, he felt something cold and familiar creeping up his spine. The same feeling he'd had in that alley in Medellin 36 years ago, when the world had shifted beneath his feet and nothing would ever be the same again. Sophia was scrolling through her phone now, looking for clues that wouldn't be there. Maybe it's some kind of medical research program, or a foundation that tracks cancer patients? "Maybe," Marcus said, but he was thinking about dark eyes in a dimly lit bar, about a quiet voice asking gentle questions about family, about home, about two words whispered in the chaos: "Gracias, Nino." His hands started to shake. The bell above the shop door chimed, and both Marcus and Sophia turned toward the sound. A man in an expensive suit stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, his face hidden in shadow. Average height, salt and pepper hair, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. "Mr. Rivera?" The man's voice carried a slight accent that Marcus couldn't place immediately. "My name is Carlos Mendoza. I represent certain interests regarding your daughter's medical situation." Sophia stepped closer to her father instinctively. "Who are you? How do you know about—" "The payments have been arranged," Mendoza continued, ignoring Sophia's question. "Your treatments will continue without interruption. There are no conditions, no expectations. Consider it a gift from someone who remembers an old kindness." Marcus felt his knees go weak. The shop seemed to spin around him, 36 years collapsing into a single moment of terrible recognition. "No, that's not possible. He's dead. They killed him in '93. Mendoza's smile was thin, knowing death can be negotiable for men of sufficient resources and foresight. "The gentleman I represent has been watching over you for many years, Mr. Rivera. You saved his life once. Now he returns the favor." "Dad?" Sophia's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's he talking about? Who did you save?" Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because suddenly he knew with horrible certainty exactly who had paid for his daughter's treatment, who had been watching him all these years, who remembered a 22-year-old boy throwing himself over a stranger in a Colombian bar. The most dangerous man who had ever lived was still alive. And now Marcus owed him everything. "I think there's been a mistake," Marcus finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what you're talking about. I never saved anyone." Mendoza's smile didn't waver. "Bar La Rosa, Medellin, July 15th, 1987. You threw yourself over a stranger when the gunmen came, took 3 bullets that were meant for him." He paused, letting the words sink in. "He has never forgotten your face, Mr. Rivera." Sophia grabbed her father's arm. "Dad, what is he talking about? You were in Colombia? You never told me." "It was nothing," Marcus said quickly, too quickly. "College backpacking trip. There was some trouble at a bar, but I don't remember—" "You remember everything," Mendoza's voice carried quiet certainty. "The nightmares, the way you still flinch when cars backfire, The reason you joined the DEA and burned out after 3 years. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, fear transmuting into desperate anger. Get out! Get out of my shop right now! I understand your confusion, Mendoza continued as if Marcus hadn't spoken, but the debt is real and it has been acknowledged. Your daughter's treatments will continue. Your mortgage has been paid in full. A trust fund has been established for your retirement. No. Marcus stepped forward, his hands clenching into fists. Whatever this is, whatever game you're playing, the answer is no. Take the money back, all of it. Mendoza tilted his head slightly. That would be inadvisable. The gentleman I represent does not take rejection well. He prefers gratitude. Sophia's face had gone pale. Dad, who is he talking about? Who did you save? Marcus couldn't look at his daughter, couldn't bear to see the moment when innocence died in her eyes the way it had died in his 36 years ago. Nobody important, just some guy caught in gang violence. The most powerful man in the Western Hemisphere, Mendoza corrected gently. A man who built an empire worth billions. A man who has been dead to the world for 30 years while he watched over the boy who saved his life. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He stumbled backward, reaching for the workbench to steady himself. Pablo Escobar is dead. They showed his body on television. I saw the pictures. Bodies can be staged, deaths can be faked. Money buys many things, including the cooperation of governments eager to claim victory. Mendoza adjusted his tie with casual precision. He has lived quietly since then, watching, waiting, ensuring that the young man who showed him kindness was protected. You're lying. But even as Marcus said it, pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The way his DEA background checks had come back clean despite his time in Colombia. The anonymous tips that had helped him crack his biggest cases. The mysterious buyer who'd paid full asking price for Elena's parents' house when they needed the money for her father's medical care. Sophia was staring at him with something approaching horror. Dad, please tell me you didn't save Pablo Escobar. Please tell me that's not what this is about. Marcus opened his mouth to lie, to tell her it was all a mistake, but Mendoza spoke first. Your father is a hero, Miss Rivera. He risked his life for a stranger without knowing who that man was or what he represented. That act of pure human decency saved the life of someone who has spent the last 36 years ensuring your family's safety and prosperity. Safety? Sophia's voice cracked. We're supposed to feel safe knowing Pablo Escobar has been watching us? The temperature in the shop seemed to drop 20 degrees. Marcus watched Mendoza's expression shift, the polite mask slipping just enough to reveal something cold and sharp underneath. You should feel grateful, Mendoza said quietly. Do you know how many people would kill to harm the family of Pablo Escobar's savior? How many enemies would pay fortunes for the opportunity to send him a message through the people he protects? Marcus felt his legs give out. He slumped against the workbench, understanding flooding through him like ice water. The protection, all these years. If something happened to us, it would be seen as a direct attack on him, yes. Mendoza's smile returned, but it was different now, predatory. Which is why it would be very unwise to refuse his generosity, or to contact law enforcement, or to attempt to disappear. Sophia sank onto the couch, her face in her hands. This isn't real. This can't be happening. Marcus looked at his daughter, his brave, fighting daughter who just wanted to beat cancer and live a normal life, and felt something break inside his chest. Every choice had been taken from them. Every option had been closed off by an act of kindness performed by a stupid 22-year-old kid who thought he was saving an innocent man. The debt was real, the danger was real, and there was no way out. How long have you known, she whispered. Marcus wanted to tell her he'd suspected nothing, that this was as shocking to him as it was to her. But the lie died in his throat as he met her gaze. I didn't know for certain, but there were signs, things that never made sense. What kind of signs? Her voice was getting stronger, harder. The same tone Elena used when she was done accepting half-truths. Mendoza watched their exchange with patient interest, like a scientist observing a reaction he'd predicted down to the molecular level. The DEA, Marcus said finally. When I applied, my background check should have raised flags. I'd been questioned by Colombian police about the bar shooting. There were photographs of me at the hospital with the bullet wounds, but somehow none of that showed up in my file. Sophia's face went white. You were shot? You never told me you were shot. 3 times, shoulder, ribs, and leg. I spent 2 weeks in a Medellin hospital before the embassy could arrange transport home. Marcus touched his left shoulder unconsciously, where the scar still pulled tight when it rained. But when I joined the DEA, my medical records were clean, no mention of gunshot wounds, like it never happened. What else? Sophia's voice was barely audible now. Marcus felt 36 years of carefully buried suspicions clawing their way to the surface. The cases I worked, I'd get anonymous tips that always panned out perfectly. Information that should have taken months of investigation just handed to me. My success rate was impossible. He remembered the night Elena had asked him about it, how he'd always seemed to know exactly where to look, exactly which threads to pull. He'd told her he was just good at reading people, good at connecting dots. But even then, lying in their bed with his wife's head on his shoulder, he'd wondered if someone was watching, helping, guiding his career with an invisible hand. And when Elena got sick, he continued, his voice breaking slightly, the experimental treatment in Houston, we couldn't afford it, but somehow our insurance approved it overnight, full coverage for a procedure they denied 6 times before. Sophia pressed her hands against her mouth. Oh God, Dad, how could you not have known? Because I didn't want to know. The words exploded out of him with 36 years of suppressed terror behind them. Because if I admitted what I suspected, I'd have to face what I'd done, what I'd become complicit in just by staying silent. Mendoza cleared his throat gently. Your father made the only rational choice available to him. He protected his family by accepting protection he couldn't refuse. But all those people, Sophia said, tears starting to fall. All the people Escobar killed, the families destroyed by his drugs, and we've been living off his money? Marcus felt something fundamental crumbling inside his chest. He thought of every DEA operation he'd participated in, every dealer he'd arrested, every family he'd told that justice would be served. All while knowing, somewhere in the darkest corner of his mind, that the money paying for his daughter's education had been earned by the very evil he'd sworn to fight. I convinced myself it wasn't real, he said, that it was coincidence or luck or just anything else, because the alternative was admitting that I'd saved a monster and spent the rest of my life as his pet project. You saved a man, Mendoza corrected firmly. What he became afterward was not your responsibility. Wasn't it? Marcus laughed bitterly. How many people died because I kept him alive? How many children became addicts because I threw myself over him in that bar? The weight of it was crushing now, all the guilt he'd refused to acknowledge for 3 decades. Every news story about Colombian violence, every family destroyed by cocaine, every child's funeral he'd watched on television, wondering if those deaths could be traced back to a split-second decision made by a naive college kid who thought he was doing the right thing. You couldn't have known, Sophia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Couldn't I? Marcus met her eyes. Even then there were rumors about who he was, the way his bodyguards moved, the deference from the other patrons. I told myself I was saving an innocent man, but part of me knew. Part of me always knew. Mendoza adjusted his cufflinks with practiced patience. This discussion, while illuminating, changes nothing about your current situation. The debt exists, the protection continues, and now there are certain expectations. The temperature in the shop seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Marcus felt the familiar chill of inevitability, the same feeling he'd had in that Medellin hospital when the doctor told him how lucky he was to be alive. What kind of expectations? Sophia asked. Mendoza's smile returned, cold and sharp as a blade. The kind that ensure this conversation remains private, forever. There's something else, Marcus said suddenly, his voice hollow. Something I never told anyone, not even Elena. Sophia looked up at him, fresh tears threatening. What? Marcus closed his eyes, remembering that night in the hospital in Medellin, the pain medication making everything fuzzy around the edges, the way shadows moved wrong in the corners of his vision. The man I saved. When they were loading me into the ambulance, he came to see me. Mendoza's expression sharpened with interest, but he remained silent. He sat by my bed for maybe 10 minutes. Didn't say much, just watched me. But before he left, he asked about my family, where I was from, what I planned to do with my life. Marcus opened his eyes, meeting Sophia's horrified gaze. I told him everything. I was drugged and scared and grateful to be alive, so I just talked. About home, about wanting to make a difference, about the girl I was planning to marry when I got back to Arizona. Elena, Sophia whispered. I told him her name. I told him about your grandfather's auto shop, about how Elena wanted to be a teacher. I gave a complete stranger everything he needed to find us. Marcus laughed bitterly. But he wasn't a stranger, was he? He was Pablo fucking Escobar, and I handed him my entire life on a silver platter. Mendoza nodded approvingly. He was impressed by your honesty, your innocence. It confirmed his belief that you were worth protecting. Worth controlling, you mean? Marcus felt anger building in his chest, hot and clean after decades of guilt. This was never about gratitude or debt, this was about ownership. Sophia's voice was barely audible. What do you mean? Marcus looked at Mendoza, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a messenger or representative, but a handler, a leash disguised as kindness. How many times have you watched us? How many decisions have been influenced by your suggestions? When I quit the DEA early, was that really my choice? Or did someone think I was getting too close to something I shouldn't see? Mendoza's smile flickered slightly. Your father has an active imagination. My mother, Sophia said suddenly, her voice sharp with realization. The car accident when I was 12. She was driving to meet with that insurance investigator about Dad's DEA pension irregularities. She never made it to that meeting. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena's accident. A drunk driver who'd run a red light and died on impact. No witnesses, no surveillance footage. The case had closed within a week, ruled a tragic coincidence. Elena wasn't part of this, Marcus said, but even as he spoke, he could hear the doubt in his own voice. She didn't know anything about Colombia, about the bar. Your wife was asking uncomfortable questions, Mendoza replied carefully, about your career success, about certain financial irregularities in your pension fund, about why a man who served only 3 years in the DEA was receiving benefits reserved for 20-year veterans. Sophia stood up abruptly, her face flushed with rage. You killed my mother because she was too smart for your game? Mendoza's composure cracked just slightly. Your mother's death was an unfortunate. Shut up. Sophia's voice carried a fury Marcus had never heard before. Don't you dare call it unfortunate. Don't pretend you didn't plan it. Marcus felt the world shifting beneath his feet again. But this time it wasn't fear driving the change, it was clarity. Everything he'd believed about Elena's death, about their life together, about the choices he'd made, had been carefully constructed lies. They weren't protected, they were prisoners. They weren't grateful recipients of generosity, they were assets being managed. Here's what I think happened, Marcus said, his voice growing steadier with each word. Pablo Escobar didn't fake his death out of fear or wisdom. He faked it because he was bored, because running a cartel from the shadows was just another game to him. And I became his favorite toy, the innocent American boy whose life he could puppet from a distance. Mendoza's smile had disappeared entirely now. Mr. Rivera, I would advise against... Against what? Against finally understanding that my wife is dead because your boss couldn't stand the possibility of losing control over his pet project? Marcus stepped closer to Mendoza. 36 years of suppressed rage finally finding its target. You want to know what I think? I think Pablo Escobar is still alive because he's too much of a coward to face the consequences of what he built. He'd rather play God with other people's lives than take responsibility for his own. The temperature in the shop seemed to plummet. Mendoza's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket. Careful, Mr. Rivera, that borders on disrespect. Good, Marcus said, because that's exactly what it is. You think you understand the situation, Mendoza said finally, his voice carrying a new edge. But you're seeing only fragments. Then enlighten me. Marcus crossed his arms, aware that Sophia had moved to stand beside him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Tell me how murdering my wife was part of some grand protection plan. Mendoza's eyes flicked between father and daughter, calculating. Your wife discovered financial irregularities that would have triggered a federal investigation, not just into your pension, but into patterns of law enforcement corruption spanning 3 decades. Do you have any idea how many careers, how many families would have been destroyed if Elena had taken her suspicions to the FBI? Sophia made a sound of disgust. So you killed her to protect corrupt cops? We protected an entire network of dedicated law enforcement officers whose only crime was accepting help to better serve their communities. Mendoza's composure was returning, sliding back into place like armor. Men like your father, who used enhanced intelligence to take dangerous criminals off the streets. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. How many others? How many DEA agents, FBI, local police? Does it matter? The results spoke for themselves. Drug seizures increased by 40% in regions where our assisted officers operated. Conviction rates improved dramatically. Innocent lives were saved. Built on blood money, Sophia said. Mendoza shrugged. All money has blood on it, Miss Rivera. At least this blood served a purpose beyond mere profit. Marcus thought about his former colleagues, wondering how many had received similar anonymous assistance. How many successful careers had been built on carefully curated intelligence from the very criminals they thought they were fighting? The cancer treatments, he said suddenly. Sophia's doctors. They're part of this too, aren't they? Dr. Hernandez received his medical education courtesy of a scholarship program established in 1995, Mendoza confirmed, as did Dr. Martinez and several members of the nursing staff. They provide excellent care to all their patients, but they understand the importance of discretion regarding certain benefactors. Sophia pressed her hand to her mouth. My entire medical team, they've been reporting on my condition. Ensuring you receive the best possible treatment, Mendoza corrected. Pablo values nothing more than loyalty, and your father's protection of him represents the purest form of loyalty he has ever encountered. Your well-being is therefore of paramount importance. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place, each revelation more nauseating than the last. The experimental treatment in Houston. When Elena and I flew out there, we were watched the entire time. Protected, Mendoza said. There are many people who would pay handsomely for information about Pablo's American family. We're not his family, Sophia snapped. Mendoza's smile was almost paternal. You have been his primary concern for 36 years. If that isn't family, what is? The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus stared at this man who spoke of surveillance and murder with the casual tone of someone discussing weather, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The guilt and fear that had defined his adult life were transforming into something harder, cleaner. He's dying, isn't he? Marcus said suddenly. Mendoza's mask slipped for just an instant, revealing something that might have been surprise. That's why you're here now, Marcus continued, pieces falling together with crystalline clarity. That's why the payments stopped being anonymous. After 36 years of hiding in the shadows, pulling strings from a distance, he's finally running out of time. Pablo Escobar is in excellent health, Mendoza said, but his response came a fraction too quickly. Sophia moved closer to her father. What does that mean for us? Marcus looked at his daughter, this brave young woman who had endured chemotherapy and radiation while unknowingly living under the protection of one of history's most notorious criminals, and felt a clarity he hadn't experienced since that night in Medellin. It means, he said slowly, that the rules are about to change. Mendoza straightened his tie, the gesture sharp with suppressed tension. Mr. Rivera, I think you may be overestimating your position in this arrangement. Am I? Marcus stepped forward, close enough now to see the fine sheen of sweat on Mendoza's forehead despite the shop's air conditioning. Because it seems to me that if Pablo is dying, then the only thing standing between his legacy and complete exposure is my continued silence. And what exactly do you think you could expose? Marcus smiled for the first time since Mendoza had entered his shop. Everything. You would destroy yourself, Mendoza said carefully. Your own complicity, your daughter's medical care, the pension that supports, your comfortable retirement. Marcus felt Sophia's hand slip into his, her fingers cold but steady. The gesture anchored him, reminded him what he was fighting for. Not just truth, but the possibility of a life built on something other than blood money and buried secrets. You're right, Marcus said. I would lose everything, but you know what I'd gain? He squeezed Sophia's hand. My soul back. Dad, Sophia whispered, but there was pride in her voice now, not fear. Mendoza's hand moved closer to his jacket. Pablo will not appreciate threats from someone he considers family. Then maybe it's time he learned that family means more than ownership. Marcus felt decades of suppressed fury crystallizing into purpose. I spent 36 years wondering if every good thing in my life was earned or given. Every case I closed, every promotion, every dollar that paid for my daughter's treatment, all of it poisoned by doubt. You want to know what that does to a man? It hollows him out, makes him a ghost haunting his own life. The shop's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Mendoza's face. For the first time since entering, he looked uncertain. Your wife understood the price of knowledge, he said, his voice losing its earlier smoothness. Are you prepared to pay the same? Sophia stepped forward, releasing her father's hand. Are you threatening us? I am offering perspective, Mendoza replied, but his eyes remained fixed on Marcus. Elena chose to pursue dangerous questions despite warnings. The consequences were regrettable but necessary. Something snapped inside Marcus's chest. 36 years of guilt and fear and carefully maintained denial erupted in a single moment of crystalline rage. Necessary? His voice was barely controlled. My wife was the best person I ever knew. She spent her life teaching children, helping families, making the world smaller and kinder, and you killed her because she asked questions about money we never should have accepted. She was going to destroy you, Mendoza said. The investigation would have revealed everything. Your DEA career, the medical payments, the network of assisted officers. You would have lost your pension, your reputation, your freedom. She was going to make you a criminal. I already was a criminal. The words tore from Marcus's throat. The moment I stayed silent about who I'd saved, I became complicit in every murder, every life destroyed by the cocaine trade, every family torn apart by violence. Elena would have exposed the truth, and the truth is that I've been a coward for 36 years. Sophia was crying now, but she stood straighter, her chin raised in defiance. My mother died because she loved us enough to risk everything for honesty. And we've spent 15 years dishonoring that by pretending it was an accident. Mendoza's composure was fracturing visibly. Marcus realized that in all his years of managing Pablo's American assets, the man had probably never encountered genuine resistance. His victims had always been isolated, vulnerable, dependent on the very system that controlled them. You're making a mistake, Mendoza said, his hand now openly resting inside his jacket. Pablo has invested too much in this relationship to allow it to end badly. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. That's his flaw, isn't it? He sees people as investments, assets to be managed. But I'm not an asset. I'm a 58-year-old man who's tired of living in a cage, even if the bars are made of gold. What are you proposing? The question came out sharper than Mendoza had intended, revealing his growing desperation. Marcus looked around his shop, the business built with blood money, the life constructed on lies, the legacy he was about to hand his daughter. Then he met Mendoza's eyes with a clarity that surprised him. I'm going to tell my story, all of it. The bar, the hospital, the years of assistance, Elena's murder. I'm going to give the FBI everything I know about Pablo's network, his assisted officers, his financial operations. And I'm going to do it publicly, so the whole world knows what the cost of silence really is. Mendoza's face had gone pale. You'll never make it to the FBI. You won't live long enough to— Yes, I will, Sophia interrupted, her voice steady despite her tears. Because I'm going with him, and if anything happens to either of us, copies of everything go to every major news outlet in the country. We've already made arrangements. It was a bluff, but delivered with such conviction that Marcus almost believed it himself. More importantly, Mendoza believed it. The man in the expensive suit stood frozen for a moment, calculations running behind his eyes. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and Marcus knew they had won something. Maybe not everything, but enough. The debt was finally being paid. There will be consequences, Mendoza said finally, but the threat carried no weight. He looked older suddenly, diminished by the collapse of his carefully maintained control. People who depend on this arrangement, careers built on assisted intelligence, families whose lives will be destroyed. Marcus felt no satisfaction in the man's defeat, only a bone-deep weariness that had been accumulating for decades. Those people made their choices, just like I made mine. Mendoza withdrew his hand from his jacket, empty. He smoothed his tie one final time, the gesture automatic and meaningless now. Pablo will want to meet with you, before you do anything irreversible. No, the word came out cleaner than Marcus had expected. Tell him the boy who saved his life is gone. Has been gone for 36 years. He's been protecting a ghost. Sophia moved to stand beside her father, close enough that their shoulders touched. Marcus could feel her trembling, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. We're not ungrateful for the medical care, but it ends now, all of it. Mendoza studied them both for another moment, then nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket carefully, telegraphing the movement, and withdrew a business card. When you realize what you're giving up, call this number. The offer won't remain open indefinitely. He placed the card on Marcus's workbench, next to a socket wrench that had been Elena's last birthday gift to him. The juxtaposition of blood money and honest love struck Marcus as unbearably perfect. After Mendoza left, the shop felt different, larger somehow, as if invisible walls had been torn down. Marcus and Sophia stood in the sudden silence, listening to their own breathing. Are we really going to do this? Sophia asked. Go to the FBI? Marcus picked up Elena's wrench, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. Your mother would have done it years ago. She would have walked into that federal building the day she found the first irregularity, consequences be damned. She also would have made sure we were prepared for what came next. Sophia's practical nature, so much like Elena's, was already asserting itself. We'll need lawyers, protection, a plan. Yes. Marcus set the wrench down carefully, precisely where Elena had always kept it. But first, I need to visit your mother's grave. I have 36 years of apologies to make. 3 hours later, they stood at Elena's headstone in Desert View Cemetery, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Marcus had brought flowers, white roses. Her favorite, though the gesture felt inadequate after so many years of silence. I should have known, he said, kneeling to place the roses against the granite marker. About the investigation, the questions you were asking, I should have been paying attention instead of hiding from my own conscience. Sophia knelt beside him, her hand finding his shoulder. She knew you loved her. That's what mattered to her. Marcus traced Elena's name with his fingertip, carved deep into the stone. Elena Rivera, beloved wife and mother, teacher and friend. The inscription had been his choice, approved by a man he now knew had been watching from the shadows, calculating the cost of grief. We're going to make this right, he whispered to the headstone. Whatever it takes, whatever we lose, we're going to tell the truth, the whole truth. When they finally stood to leave, Marcus felt lighter than he had in decades. The guilt wasn't gone, might never be completely gone, but it no longer controlled him. Elena's death would always be a wound in his heart, but it would no longer be a chain around his soul. The FBI field office in Phoenix was a monument to institutional authority, all glass and steel and American flags. Marcus and Sophia climbed the steps together the next morning, carrying copies of every document Marcus had accumulated over 36 years of willful blindness, bank records, pension statements, medical bills paid by anonymous benefactors, evidence of a life built on blood money and sustained by silence. The story would take hours to tell completely. The investigation that followed would consume months, maybe years. Marcus knew that some of the corrupt officers Mendoza had mentioned would escape justice, disappearing into the same shadows that had hidden Pablo Escobar for 3 decades. But enough would remain to matter. Enough truth would emerge to honor Elena's memory. As they reached the building's entrance, Sophia squeezed his hand. Ready? Marcus looked back once at the city sprawling beneath the desert sun, Phoenix, rising from ashes, burning clean and bright. Then he turned toward the doors and the reckoning waiting beyond them. I'm ready. The debt was finally paid in full.